My name is Olivia Wilson, and I am 25 years old. My sister stole my 4 years of savings for an iPhone. When I confronted her, my parents kicked me out. 4 years later, I got a call asking for help. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. My sister took my funds to get an iPhone. When I objected, my parents told me that if I could not share, I should leave the house. I fled away with only the clothes on my back, and nobody sought me for years. She is now ill, and her family is pleading with me to look after her. But the last time I was with my family, they took away my desire to ever return. The first time I realized the home was no longer mine was on a July afternoon when the air conditioner was half dead and my work uniform was still sweaty against my skin. I had just returned home from a morning shift at the diner where I'd worked for nearly 4 years, pouring coffee, cleaning vomit from the men's room, and putting up with cheap passes from lonely truck drivers. I was 25. I lived with my parents and my younger sister, who was 3 years younger than me, and I'd been conserving every darn cent to get out of there. I had no luxury. I did not go out. I did not buy new clothing. I didn't even repair my damaged phone, which would shut off if you angled it too much. All of my efforts went into that savings account, which, while little, was my only consolation for getting up early every day. I recall walking in that day and noticing my bedroom door was ajar. That wasn't usual because I always kept it locked. I had the tingling sensation in my gut that comes with knowing something is awry. When I entered, my suspicions were verified. The drawer that held my paperwork and a notepad containing my bank passwords was open. Everything was a disaster. I took out my phone to check my bank's app, which had cost me tears to get accepted due to my lack of credit history. And there was the surprise. My savings account was at zero. Not a single cent remained. It took me 3 seconds to notice the transactions. That afternoon, I made a complete transfer to an unknown account. I could not believe it. My chest felt like it had been ripped apart. My hands were shaking. I could hardly breathe. I stormed out searching for my sister. I found her sitting on the couch, joyful and smiling as if nothing had occurred, showing my mother the new iPhone she had recently purchased. The most recent model with the transparent casing still sparkling like a diamond. She said something like, "Look at the camera, Mom. It's insane." I'm not sure what expression I made, but they both went quiet when they saw me. I did not shout at first. I immediately questioned her, "Where did you get the money for that?" Her response was so blatant that I wanted to smash the phone in her face. She informed me she had used my funds and that I wasn't going to utilize them immediately anyway. She didn't say it as if she had borrowed money, but as if it were her own. I was shocked. I looked to my mother for a reaction, a show of disapproval, wrath, or a boundary being established, but all she did was raise an eyebrow and urged me not to brag since a good sister understands how to share. In that moment, I laughed nervously, dryly, and bitterly. I returned to my sister and informed her that if she did not return the money to me right away, I would report her for theft. At that point, my father, Tate, emerged with his usual irritated expression and dictatorial tone, asking what was going on. My mother explained everything in her sickly, sweet voice, which she employs to influence him, but he didn't need to hear anything. He scoffed at me and uttered something that stuck with me like a death sentence. "If you don't know how to communicate with your family, you can leave. There is no space for selfish individuals here." I stood there stunned, staring at them like they were strangers. It was difficult to accept that they were serious, that this was reality, and that in this family an iPhone was worth more than years of hard labor. I walked straight to my room, shut the door, and sat on the bed, my breath stuck in my throat. My body was quivering from wrath and shame. I double-checked my account transactions, hoping that gazing at them for long enough would make them disappear, but they remained cold and unpunished. She had used my Social Security information to set up Apple Pay. She did not even bother to disguise it. She knew me very well. She knew where I stored my belongings. She knew my passwords. I walked to the bus terminal and boarded the first bus that left. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to go. I didn't know if I'd get a job, if I'd wind up homeless, or if anybody would help me. But I knew I had nothing left to lose in that house. They took my cash. Yes, they also took away my ability to trust, to think that being family meant something. That was the last time anyone heard from me in many years. Update 1. It had been a little more than 4 years since that early morning when I boarded a bus with nothing but the clothes on my back and a combination of fury, despair, and desperation burning inside me. During that period, no one looked for me, no message, no call, and no indication of life. Initially, I anticipated it. I will not lie. Every night I went to bed obsessively checking the prepaid phone I had managed to purchase. With the little money I had left over after spending weeks eating in shelters and cleaning toilets for $10 per hour, I hoped my mother would understand what they had done. My father would rethink, and my sister, perhaps out of shame, would call to apologize. But the line stayed quiet as if I didn't exist, as if departing without permission was enough to remove my name from the family scrapbook. It was not easy. The first several weeks were the roughest. I slept wherever I could, ate whatever I could find, and accepted any work that kept me off the streets. I fell several times. I once ended up in the hospital due to dehydration. Another time, my backpack with my paperwork was stolen, and I had to spend 3 months attempting to reclaim my ID, dealing with ludicrous bureaucracy and bureaucrats who treated me like trash. But I slowly pulled myself up. I clutched onto my pride as if it were the last thing I had left. I convinced myself that no one would save me, and that if I wanted to survive, I had to do it alone. So I did. I eventually got stable work at a diner in downtown Philadelphia, one in which they did not treat me as a slave, and the supervisor, although gruff, paid on time and did not allow customers to go out of line. They offered me more shifts, and I accepted them all. I began saving every penny like it was gold. I moved into a shared room with 4 other females, 3 of whom spoke little English, but at least they did not touch my belongings. I learned to cook on a single hot plate, hand-wash clothing, walk long distances, and avoid spending money on public transportation, and thus, gradually, my existence started seeming like a punishment. Until one day, without warning or context, my phone rang with the same neutral tone I'd heard so many times without thinking twice. However, at that moment, it caused me to utterly freeze. It was a familiar number, my father's phone number. I remembered it even though it was no longer in my contacts. I watched it flash for a few seconds, my heart in my throat and my mind racing. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to know, but because I couldn't bear to hear that voice. The last time it spoke to me, it had tossed me out of the home as if I were an invader, as if I didn't deserve a meal or a place to sleep. After years of destroying my back, he left a message that I did not immediately listen to. I entered the diner's washroom, cleaned my face, and pulled my hair back as if it were a barrier to the memories. I proceeded to work as if nothing had occurred, but it was not nothing. I had a feeling that this call wasn't innocent. If they picked up the phone after 4 years, it was not because they missed me. They needed something. That night in my bed under a bleach-stained blanket, I checked my voicemail, and there was the same voice, harsh, dry, almost fake sympathy. He said he needed to talk to me, that it was vital my sister was not well, and that as a family we should stick together, especially during tough times. That was the precise phrase, challenging times. The way he said it caused me to close my eyes in wrath. Difficult times, that's what they were calling karma right now. Life returning all they had done to me. I pictured his scowling expression. For example, he used to shout at me for sobbing and tell me that if I couldn't share, I could go. He did not utter my name once. He did not mention daughter. He didn't apologize. He did not admit anything. Just that small voice saying, "We have a problem. We need your help." And I realized they hadn't changed. They didn't want to know if I was fine. They didn't care where I slept for 4 years, what I ate, or whether I was able to get back up after being shoved into the nothingness. They wanted something. Every time they sought me, it was because they needed something, because their world was crumbling, and they assumed they could just call me like I was, a tool, an extension of their own interests, as if I owed them anything. That night I erased the message. I did not react. I did not call back. I didn't provide them any addresses or signs. I went to my early morning shift and worked like any other day, but something flared inside me. It was not compassion. It was not sadness. It was colder and more deliberate. A concept was developing. Even though it had no shape at the time, it was already growing strength. If they're going to seek me, let them know I'm not the same person anymore. That the next time they would not find me shattered, sobbing, or eager to explain. That if they wanted me to return, they would have to pay for every cent, every tear, and every moment they made me feel useless. And there, in that stillness of pride and wrath, the revenge they had SWN began to take root. The day they decided a phone was more valuable than a daughter. Number update 2. It has been about 9 months since that attempted contact. It's been half a year since my father's voicemail in which he spoke about difficult times and the need to be close as a family. Since then, I have not heard from them. They did not call again. They did not write. They did not send anyone to find me. It was as if they had not received the desired reaction. They had simply opted to carry on with their lives, just as I had when I walked out of that house with a rucksack and $65 in my pocket. So when they departed, I proceeded to establish my own life. It wasn't a lavish lifestyle, but it was mine. I worked from sunrise to sunset at an empanada business that recruited me after the proprietor, a Dominican man with a quick temper and a magic touch with spice, noticed how I sorted client orders at the cafe without making a single error. The guy wasn't really nice, but he paid well and respected my hours. He let me handle the closing, trusted me with the register, and even showed me how to mix dough by hand. He would remark, "No tricks, the right way," in that shop smelling of old grease and burnt flour. One of the girls I worked with who knew nothing about my story mentioned she had read on a medical forum about a young woman with a serious kidney condition who urgently needed a transplant, and they were looking for compatible donors in the state. I didn't think much of it at first, but after hours of washing the grills with a worn-out sponge, the statement stayed in my brain. I related that to what my father had said months before in that strained voice that sought to seem tough yet conveyed a feeling of urgency. On a hunch, I went to the toilet, shut the door, and searched Facebook for the accounts I had vowed never to visit again. There they were, with the usual smiling images, hypocritical comments, and attempts to appear like a perfect family. But there was something odd about my sister's profile, which was usually filled with edited photos and stolen Pinterest phrases. A hospital photo shows her pale with heavy bags under her eyes, wearing a medical gown and holding an Roman 4. The caption said something like, "One day at a time, God is with me always." My fingertips quiver, not from sympathy or despair. They shivered with wrath as they realized what it was like to have no control and to rely on others to keep going. I spent the following few days performing my usual routine. Work, home, but the notion was already there like a fly that refused to go. I attempted to ignore it, but I couldn't. So, one Tuesday after shutting the business and still wearing my ruined uniform, I went to a nearby free clinic. I answered with a false smile that I wanted to get some blood work done. They looked at me oddly at first because I did not have any symptoms or immediate demands. However, when I informed them that a family member was unwell and I wanted to check whether I was a suitable donor, their attitude shifted. They collected my samples. They asked whether I wanted to register my information for the donation program, and I consented. But I didn't provide many specifics. I used an alias to prevent being discovered, my paternal grandmother's surname, an imagined location for a property that no longer existed, and a phone number I rarely used. 3 weeks later, they phoned me. My blood type was a match. They didn't know with whom because the other party wasn't in their system, but they promised to notify me if there was an external match. I didn't say it aloud, but I knew it in that moment. It was Reagan, my sister, the same person who stole from me, humiliated me, and watched me pack my belongings and walk out the door without a word, and now the same one whose days were numbered is without a donor in sight. I did not inform anyone. I didn't have anybody to tell really. I held on to that knowledge like a grenade carefully, yet with the conviction that it will detonate at some point. In the meantime, I kept receiving indirect signals on social media. My mother, who had never used Facebook before, was now writing things like family is all that matters or forgiveness is stronger than pride. It made me ill. I wanted to comment on every post to expose them and tell everyone what I had gone through. But no, I was done with the drama. My strategy was different. I did not want apologies. I wanted them to experience the same emptiness they made me feel, to understand what it was like to rely on someone you humiliated. To live in desperation for something you can't obtain with money or nice speeches. So I did nothing. I did not call them. I did not react. I didn't raise my hand and say, "Here I am, I can help," not because I couldn't, but because I no longer wanted to. Because when they tossed me out, they didn't care if I survived, even though I was crying and carrying a rucksack. Now it was my turn to make a decision, and I determined that if they ever wanted anything from me, it would have to be on my terms. It would be when I decided, not when they need me. And in that stillness, in that waiting, I began to plan the first phase of my vengeance because they still assumed I was the same girl, that if they talked nicely or mentioned the term family, I would run like a grateful puppy. But now I was in control. I was the one who had what they need, and if I'd learned anything during those 4 years, it was that you don't brag about power. You hold it in quietly with the coolness of someone who is no longer frightened to fail. Because after you've already lost everything, the only option is to retaliate with equal or greater force, and it was precisely what I intended to do. Update 3. It had been a little over 13 months since I had heard anything substantial from them. For a whole year, stillness became my norm, but this time as a barrier rather than a punishment. A year in which, without any family drama, my life began to change. I'd managed to get out of that small shared room where there was no place for dignity, and now I had my own studio apartment, modest but adequate, in an area of Philadelphia that did not smell of dampness or sorrow. At the shop where I worked, I was no longer just closing shifts. I was basically the owner's right-hand lady. He had shown me how to manage accounting, negotiate prices with suppliers, deal with inspectors, and run a business without paying anybody anything. He never mentioned it in words, but he trusted me enough to promise in his harsh and dry tone that if I ever wanted to go independent, he would help me with part of the funds. I didn't say it out, but it was one of the first times I felt like someone actually believed in me without any manipulation or emotional obligation. It was also around this time that I decided to pursue my ambition of starting my own business, which I had been planning since moving to this city. I had no contacts, no name, and I was starving. I was eager to construct something of my own to show to myself that I could do it from the ground up with calloused hands and a mind full of statistics. I began with a modest food truck serving smoked brisket sandwiches, which I parked near the community college. At first, I just sold enough to pay my petrol and meat for the day, but owing to word of mouth and my compulsive drive to get everything right, the line gradually grew. Students, office workers, construction teams, and even a few cops chose my garlic fries to 7-Eleven's donuts. I became a part of the landscape. For the first time in years, I could declare that what I had was mine, even if I didn't have a cent to spare. I didn't depend on anyone. Nobody could steal it from me. Just when I was beginning to feel stable, a fresh letter arrived. This time, it wasn't a voicemail or a passive, aggressive social media post. It was a genuine letter sealed with my entire legal name and an address that only someone who delved hard could have discovered. The sender was a legal company. I recall staring at it with a combination of amazement and irritation. I opened it in the food truck as the ribs cooked slowly. The paper was dense, impersonal, and written in a legal tone that made it difficult to understand, but I knew completely. My parents were desperately attempting to salvage the house where we grew up, the house where they kicked me out. It found out that my sister's sickness had depleted all of their savings to cover her treatment, dialysis, drugs, care, transportation, and hospitalizations. They had mortgaged every last wall, and now the bank was breathing down their necks, demanding payments they couldn't afford. They required a co-signer or guarantor, and for some reason, well, one apparent reason, they considered me. I sat in the back of the vehicle holding a letter in one hand and a cigarette in the other. I laughed like I hadn't since I was a kid. It was not a pleasant chuckle, it was a dry and hollow chuckle. It stings because it is so ironic, because that mansion, which was now their final bastion of dignity, felt like a tomb to me. It was the location where they buried my emotions, humiliated me, and told me I was worth less than a phone. And now they have the audacity, the arrogance to come and ask me to rescue it, to defend it as if it had ever protected me. I did not respond straight away, I thought, not because I was hesitant, but because I realized this may be the chance one had been looking for, a technique to collect all debts without saying a single word. So, a few days later, I hired a lawyer, a strong, smart lady with a keen eye who was unimpressed by family drama. I described exactly what I wanted, for her to negotiate with them on my terms without giving a single inch, and for every clause of the deal to reflect the authority I now wield. I wanted to have that house in my name. I wanted them to leave in 30 days. I wanted them to leave the mess to me, the loan, the bills, the repairs, everything, but only if they disappeared, that they never contact or seek for me again, and that they realized that if I saved that roof, it was because it belonged to me, not because I cared about what happened to them. They did it. They signed. In less than a week, my lawyer called to inform me that they had agreed without a struggle. You could see by the look on their faces that they had run out of arguments, that the dread of becoming homeless outweighed their pride, and it was plenty for me, not out of malice or sadism, but because they now understood what it felt like to be on the other side. Look at someone who has what you need and beg for what you have no right to ask for. They gave me the keys as if they were delivering a punishment, their heads lowered without looking at me or saying anything. I did not hug them. I said nothing to them. I simply took the keys, signed my portion, and departed. When I entered that residence months later, the stench remained the same, a combination of stale air, cheap perfume, and old dust. I walked around every corner. My sister's room remained unchanged. My room was completely vacant, like if I had never lived, but it didn't hurt anymore. Now everything was different. Now I was in charge, and I had no intention of giving it up. I put up an under-renovation sign, hired contractors, and began the process of converting the property into an Airbnb. Not for the money, but I could use it. I did it for a far deeper reason. That home signified anguish, rejection, and abandonment. That Saturday was one of those days that began off poorly from the time you opened your eyes. A broken pipe in the food truck, a supplier who failed to arrive, a client who shouted at me because her sandwich included too much onion, and a backatch that had persisted for days as if it were a part of my body. I was in no mood for surprises, let alone one like this. Around 3:30 p.m., as I was laying on the floor of the truck's makeshift kitchen, attempting to repair a rusted hose, someone began hammering on the back door repeatedly. I assumed it was some foolish client who didn't realize that if there's no smoke, there's no food, but it wasn't. It was my mother standing there as if nothing had occurred, as if it hadn't been more than 4 years since she kicked me out, as if she hadn't kicked me out for safeguarding my own savings, as if I had not been eliminated like an uncomfortable blemish on their idyllic lives. Her face seemed different, slimmer, and more worn. Her puffy eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days, but I was not misled for a moment. I knew her. I understood how she maneuvered. She had mastered that art since I was toddler. She'd come for something. I sensed at the instant she spoke in that nearly shaking, brutally frail voice. I did not welcome her in, didn't even let her pass through the threshold. She pressed her hands on the metal frame, saying she wanted to speak with me, that it was important, and that it was about my sister. I stayed motionless, waiting for her to say what she had clearly been preparing in her mind, and she did. She claimed my sister was on her last legs, that doctors had told her she only had a few weeks left, that she was fading quickly, quicker than they thought, that her body couldn't handle it any longer, and that all she wanted was to see me, talk to me, and tell me something before she died. She looked me in the eyes and implored, as if requesting a heavenly favor, "Please do not refuse her final wish." I'm not sure what happened at that moment, because against all logic, against everything I told myself 1,000 times, I never wanted to see them again. I owed them nothing, and their anguish was not my duty. I said yes, I would go, but not for compassion or redemption. I did it because I knew whatever transpired in that room would not be about mending wounds. It was supposed to be about breaking them apart for good, about completing a tale that had never brought me comfort. And as much as I disliked admitting it, I wanted to see her in the eyes. I was hoping that when there were no masks or time left, she would finally admit what she had done to me. I removed my work gloves, switched off the vehicle, and told my mother to wait outside as I would drive. We didn't talk the whole way. She wailed silently. I grabbed the steering wheel so fiercely that my knuckles became white. The hospital was one of those lifeless, frigid places with endless white halls and fluorescent lighting that make you feel even sicker than you already do. We inquired at the front desk, walked up in quiet, and when we arrived at the corridor where she was, my mother raced ahead as if she wanted to control the situation, as if she could still handle it. I paused before entering the room. I took out the manila envelope I had in my luggage. I placed everything back in the envelope and walked inside. I saw her. She was laying there nearly unrecognizable. She had deep black bags under her eyes, transparent skin, and a tiny physique that was virtually rotted from. Inside, she glanced at me as if she wasn't certain I was genuine. Her lips moved to pronounce my name. I assured her she understood precisely what she was doing, that it was not an accident. She laughed in my face as she did it, that she allowed me to leave the house hungry, cold, and afraid. And not once did she consider picking up the phone. This was not about the phone or the money. It was about what it symbolized, the treachery, our parents' cooperation, and how they treated me like I was a nuisance, as if my only worth was the money I could supply. My mother attempted to interrupt me. She shouted something like, "Please stop." "She's dying," but I stared at her with a coldness I hadn't realized I possessed, and said that the last time I was in that house, she told me that if I couldn't share, I should go. That is what I did. I left and learned how to live without them. Now it was their turn to do the same, that if stillness bothered them, it was the same silence they had forced me to endure for years. I remained in that room for another minute, staring at my sister, at the woman who had stolen my savings, my status in the family, and who could hardly stand up in that bed. I felt no sympathy, pity, or anything, just a peculiar peace, like if I had finally paid back what was owed to me. I went out of the room without looking back. I strolled down the white corridors out to the parking lot, got into my vehicle, and drove away. I did not weep. My body did not tremble. I just took a big breath like someone releasing a weight from their chest that they had been holding for far too long. I knew that act would not solve anything, that would not restore the years I had lost, but it was mine. My manner of completing the circle and making it apparent to them that there was no turning back. That family is not founded on blood, but on loyalty. They hadn't shown me any of it. They might now grasp what it felt like to lose something, what it felt like to need someone who was no longer available. And after 4 years of waiting for them to see me, I eventually left them with the few belongings they had, their tears, remorse, and a manila envelope stuffed with invoices, number sign, final update. 6 months had elapsed since that final visit to the hospital. 6 months with no fresh calls, texts, or efforts at persuasion. It was as if they finally realized that the door they had slammed shut years before no longer existed, that what little left of the family had perished long before anybody else. During that period, I worked on turning the property into an Airbnb. I hired a renovation team, modest but competent designers, and gradually removed every corner that had ever made me feel tiny. I removed the frames with family photographs full of phony smiles. I tore down the dusty drapes that hung like ghosts from the past and made sure every room breathed fresh life, one that had nothing to do with the broken version of myself that had been there. I replaced locks painted the entire front, and treated every detail as if I were cleaning up not just a property, but a whole tainted past. The day I published the official listing online seemed like a symbolic conclusion. The description was straightforward: a beautifully refurbished family house in a quiet neighborhood, excellent for extended visits with history, character, and guaranteed seclusion. I smiled as I wrote it, knowing that whomever lived there would have no idea what the house had seen or done to me, and I wasn't going to tell them since it no longer hurt. Now it was merely a company, a lucrative property, and a consistent income, and every time a new booking notification sounded, it reminded them of all they'd sacrificed by assuming I was replaceable. My sister died a few weeks after the visit. I discovered out through a Facebook post featuring an old photo of her, one of those modified photos with angel wings and the text "Rest in Peace" written in a cutesy typeface. I didn't feel anything, not relieved, sad, or at peace. I just read it, absorbed it, and then resumed my work. A food truck customer had contacted me for a catering quotation for an occasion. I also had. Calculate the costs. I did not attend the funeral, did not bring flowers, did not sign a condolence book, and of course did not respond to my mother's SMS 2 days later. "We want to see you. We miss you. Your sister always kept you in her heart." I didn't respond. I simply snapped a screenshot of Bad, marked the contact number in red, and emailed her the link with a simple note. "You can make an appointment with me. High season rates. I do not provide discounts." And with that dry, straightforward statement, I clarified something they never seemed to comprehend. They couldn't touch me anymore. They had previously denied me that spot, but now it was mine. If they wished to enter, they had to pay for each night, both physically and figuratively. Some people ask if I regret it. Some part of me wishes I had made peace, found closure, and repaired what had been broken, and I always provide the same answer. You cannot reconstruct something that was never solid to begin with. What broke between us was not over a phone or money. It was due to what the deed revealed in that house. I was never considered important. My efforts were worth less than a whim. That my dignity was negotiable as long as it did not trouble them. They cast me out like trash, expecting me to return as a savior. But no, I was not born to clean up other people's messes. I was created to forge my own path, even if it was propelled by fury, and my feet were ripped up from walking alone for so long. Today, I reinvest every penny I earn from that property. I open a second food truck. I'm considering opening a physical site, and every time I drive by the area where I grew up, I do so without glancing down, without dread, since I am now the one with the keys. They taught me that family does not always protect you. It can be what propels you into the abyss. They also taught me that if you can crawl out of the bottom, the world opens up like a healed wound. In my situation, the wound evolved into a business, independence, and strength. The same power they attempted to destroy when they tossed me out with only the clothes on my back. So no, I've never rejoined that family and have no plans to do so. The last time I attempted to be a daughter, a sister, or a member of something, they took my desire to live. Now I am everything they never imagined. Someone who has survived and discovered that the best payback is not usually a scene. Sometimes there is quiet. It's prospering.